Hi, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvelously well. So today I want to talk about bass mixing. And the reason why is I get asked about this probably more than anything else at the moment. I use multiband compression on bass guitar. I rarely use it on other things unless I'm trying to rescue a sound source. The reason why I like to use multiband compression is so I can get an even bottom end. What we're going to do is we're going to go through it and check it out and see all the different ways that we get bass to be even throughout the mix. When you're using synth basses and stuff, it's so easy to get a consistent bottom end. But what I find with a lot of mixes that I hear using live basses is the bottom end is huge, it disappears, it just never really sort of stays consistently through the mix. So this is where multiband compression can really help you out. Also, when you go high on the neck of a bass, of course, you're going to lose some of that bottom end. So the multiband can really help keep that consistently in there as well. So let's go and check it out. As ever, please go to producelikeapro.com, sign up for the email list. And of course, there's a 14-day free trial of the Academy and loads of free stuff to download. So please go to Produce Like a Pro and subscribe. Okay, so let's check it out. So what I did, and of course, there's lots of variations on this, but the principles will remain the same. What I did here is I had two sources. I had a DI source and I had a mic on a cab. We'll display a link where you can go and see the video of the recording session so you can get a bit more detail on how we recorded. But essentially we have a DI and a cab. And there's a couple of things I've done here. Now on the DI only, we've got a time adjuster plugin running first. Now I get asked about this a lot. With the time adjuster, what I'm doing is I'm pulling back. If you see here, two things. I'm flipping the phase because the polarity is exactly reversed, as you can see there. So it's being dragged back here. And these are always an average. So if I go to samples up here, it's about an average. It says 120 there. Here it's at 161. So essentially it's an average at about 135 samples. So what this is doing is it's being pulled back and then the polarity is being flipped on the DI. Now, you can do that visually if you like, but I would always suggest that you playlist, that you have an original copy of the file before you do any messing with it. Because you can tie yourself, and I've done it myself, I've tied myself in many knots by just continually messing with files, and before you know it, I don't know where I'm at. But I personally I don't mess with it if I don't have to. I just use a time adjuster plugin. So it's pulled back, and then the phase is flipped. So the polarity is good now. So let's listen to the DI on its own. The first thing I've got going on after that, each time I do this, I could do it in a different way. Sometimes I use the DI as the clean source because there's no personality, there's no low-end distortion in the DI, and sometimes I use the amp as the clean source. Usually it's the DI, but in this instance, it's the bass cab. So there's roll-off going on. Let's take everything off. It's cool, and if it was the only source we could mess with that, but it's not the only source. So I've got an REQ going. And I'm pushing up some of those mid-range honkiness. Like I've got about 1400 here and about 750, and that's giving me that kind of because I wanted some personality out of it. And then I've got my good old-fashioned Sans amp. Just giving me a little bit more exaggerated. It's all the personality. The DI here is all about the personality. Then I've got an MV2, which you see just bringing an even tone to it. Next up, I have a bass cab down here, moving down to the bottom, and here's the bass cab. All bottom end. It's a little bit overdriven, but I kind of like it. I actually cheated and I'm using 2 MV2s, so it's getting super, super compressed. Bringing out some distortion a little bit. 2 together. The thing is with this particular tone is I wanted it really, really driven because it's a rock tune. So on my middle one here, on my bass cab, I duplicated the bass cab source and I put an MV2 on it to even it, and then distorted it even more. So here's your original sound source. So 2 cabs together. Bit of drive with the DI. Now, the reason why the REQ is so useful here is because of this roll-off at 277. What I've done is I'm getting all of the bottom end out of the way for multiple sources. So when you're using 2 or 3 different sources, it's nice not to have any phase cancellation or any polarity issues in the low end. So what I do is I'll pick only one source to be my clean bottom end. So no matter whether you're going to use the DI or the amp, I like to only use one source. I've learned that from so many big mixers. They don't talk about it that much, but they do. That's how they do it. That's what we do to get the bottom end to be clean. Okay, so next up is a multiband compressor, as promised. So what is the multiband doing? Well, the multiband is compressing everything below 250. I'm going to solo it so you can just hear it. See what it's doing? It is completely compressing it really aggressively. So there's a lot of compression going on here. And it's staying at 0 dB the whole time. So there's just that even 250 hertz compression. So no matter what he plays, even though do boom bam, it's still got all that fullness in it. So it's keeping it super fat, super full, and just really, really awesome sounding. Okay, next up is an REQ, which all I'm doing is I'm rolling off about 53 here. A fairly gentle slope, just to get it out of the way of the kick, but there's also some high-mid boost going on there. So let's just take this out of solo, and we'll listen to see what the REQ is doing. Next up, some more mid-range 800 for that kind of piano-iness on the API without it. Now, it's important when you listen to things in solo to understand that yes, you want it to sound good in solo, but it's not as important as how it sounds in the track. These EQ moves were made during the mixing process, which means putting it up against the drums. Then I added my good old favorite. I love the R bass. Now, but what you'll notice I've done, and I talk about it all the time, is I've shaped everything going into it. If I didn't have this REQ here, rolling off at about 53, and then I went into the R bass, I would have a lot of like 20 and 40 just being boosted for no reason. So what I'm doing is I'm shaping going in. I find that a lot more useful to shape going into a bass boost than I do trying to then control it afterwards. It feels more natural if I do it that way as well. So there's quite a lot of 80 boost. So there's a huge amount there. Take it off. Back on. Now there is a little shaping going on. It's gentle, very gentle to get it even more out of the way of the kick. And then a ton of mid-range personality added here. Again, it's a good bass tone if I wasn't trying to get it to point out above the drums. Put it back on. So you can do a lot of this stuff, you know, initially. But what I think is really, really important to remember, and I get asked a lot of questions like, why are you using multiple plugins? Why can't you just do that? Because that's not the mixing process. When you're mixing, you'll get your drums sounding big, loud, and slamming. You love it. And as soon as you start to add instruments, you've got to then adjust things. On the drums, you'll notice a lot. I pull out a lot of 350, 400, a lot of like kind of like ugly sound in the toms and in the rooms, which leaves room for the bass, but at the same time, you know, I still might find that there's a mid-range is not coming through. I don't want to pull out 1.5, 2K out of my snare, for instance, or the click on the kick. You know, so it's kind of a catch-22. It's just when you're mixing, when you're adding instruments, you're going to find you're going to go back and change EQ settings. But also where you position them is really important. Like I said, I like to shape going into a bass boost, but I like to have a multiband coming on first and then even it up. So I'm evening all of the bottom end first with the multiband. So it's like from 20 hertz to like 250, it's super, super even sounding. Then I'm rolling off gently, going into a bass boost and then a little bit more roll off afterwards. And that's really controlled that bottom end really nicely with no boosting, very controlled. If I put the drums in against it, so cool. So this particular track was very 70s rock. So even though it might feel overly complicated at times, really what you're doing is like you're adjusting stuff in the mix as you go. All right, so what I've done now is I've opened up a song that I recorded here with me playing bass, just so we can see some comparisons. So this is the same kind of approach. It's 1 amp, 1 DI, but in this instance, we've got the time adjuster running again so that the phase is pulled back. There's no need to flip the phase here because it was printed in phase. It wasn't flipped on the it's flipped on the console going in if necessary. So that's easy. But the first thing I've done here, you see, is I've got an REQ going where I'm just using the bottom end off of the DI. Take this off. Pretty good bass tone. I'm not going to complain about it, but you see there, now all the clean bottom end is coming from the DI. Next up is the amp with the REQ doing the opposite. See, at 200, it's more personality. Put the two together. Get a good in-phase, great polarity bass tone. Add a little distortion from the cab, tiny amount. It's got the same EQ on it so that the phase is coherent between the two mic inputs, but there's a little distortion on it as well, just to give some personality. So 3 elements together. See that consistent low end every single time. So once again on our bass master, 250 and below is being compressed. EQ, again, controlled. Little 800 there into our R bass. Then our old friend MV2. And at the end, I just added a little bit more mid-range just to make it cut above the drums and everything. This obviously is like super programmed sounding drums in that section. But you can see the bass has just got this evenness that the multiband gives us. It just gives us this thick, not keyboard sounding, but just still has personality, still sounds like a live bass guitar, but that nice, even, low end that despite where you're playing on the neck, it still cuts through. It's the only time that I always use multiband. I'm not like, otherwise I'm using multiband on guitars and stuff to kind of rescue stuff, but it works really, really great. So as ever, please leave a bunch of questions and comments below. I'm sure there's a million different ways that you do it, and I'd love to know your different experiences and stuff. And thank you ever so much for watching. Please subscribe, go to producelikeapro.com, and you can sign up for the email list and get a bunch of free stuff. And you can also try out the 14-day free trial of the Academy. Thank you ever so much. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.